Good evening. Good evening. I'm Natasha Sistrunk Robinson. For those that are joining us for the first time, I'm the visionary founder of Leadership Links Incorporated. I also happen to be the author of the book we're discussing tonight, A Sojourner's Truth, Choosing Freedom and Courage in a Divided World. And I am so glad that you join us for the last of our four-part discussion. And tonight we're focusing on the last part of the book with the theme redemption. So if you have missed any of the previous discussions and you would like to catch up on those, you can find them on our leadership links. You can search YouTube for leadership links and you will find them there. We downloaded them there. And you can also find them on the Leadership Links Facebook page. So we encourage you to visit and catch up with those and also share them. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about our sponsor, share briefly about our organization, and then I'm going to introduce you to tonight's guest, my friend. So this is the last opportunity that you have to do two things. One, we want to encourage you, if you haven't entered the giveaway, we're sharing the giveaway link now in the chat box on Zoom and on the comment section on Facebook. And you can just use that right now to enter the giveaway. This is the last giveaway for our sponsor, InterVarsity Press. So they're giving away A Sojourner's Truth. And also this week's giveaway is Healing Racial Trauma. And the subtitle is The Road to Resilience by Sheila Wise Rowe. And so you have one book you can give to a friend and one book you can read or maybe bless someone. So we encourage you to do that, to enter the giveaway and share tonight. This is the last time you can do that. And then we also want to encourage you to take advantage of our customized bookstore. So we've shared that link with you as well. We'll share it again at the end of the night. But that bookstore is live until tomorrow. And you have 40% off of the items in that store. But really, you can use the code and get 40% off any books on the InterVarsity Press website. So that's something they've done for our community, and we encourage you to take advantage of it. So briefly about Leadership Links, I am thrilled. Number one, we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary next month. And so if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter and all those things, we'll give you the information to do that tonight. We encourage you to do so because we have a lot of great things coming and we want you to be the first to know. But we founded this organization, myself and 6 other, well, a total of 6 of us from the Naval Academy came together because of our desire for leadership and education and mentoring and public service and our faith to start a network in an organization where we can really invest in raising up the next generation of leaders. And so our purpose here is doing that, really engaging, equipping servant leaders to use their skills and resources for the greater good of humanity, as well as offering our mission, that leadership education. We do that holistically in a way that promotes impactful living, character, and spiritual development. And so we're able to do that even through COVID, even through the pandemic. We are still doing that important work. And so I want you to continue to stay linked up with us. And here's our organizational video so you can see a little bit more of our work in action.
In August of 2015, Leadership Links established itself as a nonprofit organization. From what began as a yearning desire to encourage, equip, and mentor both aspiring and practicing leaders, would flourish into community building, mentorship, and spiritual enrichment. Driven by its mission to offer leadership education that facilitates impactful living, character, and spiritual development, Leadership Links guides others in developing and refining their best selves.
It's important for her to be around like-minded individuals where she can feel free to express herself and not feel uncomfortable about being a leader. And I just appreciate everything that this program has done for my daughter.
Dedicated to connecting people with purpose, Leadership Links delivers leadership training, conducts summer programs, hosts networking events, and establishes impactful mentoring relationships to slingshot people towards their goals. Making an impact on those around you is inevitable, especially when giving the right combination of love, inspiration, a strong network, knowledge, and a heart to serve. This is who we are. It's what we do. It's why we exist.
With inspiration, Leadership Links taught me how to be confident and when I take a different path than other people. And I actually found out that I inspire others when I go my own way in life. I love to volunteer in my community, and Leadership Links has helped me and connected me to other volunteer services.
We believe that this was ordained by God. We are in partnership with some wonderful people who really have a passion and a thirst to see the youth in our community reach their dreams, walk in their purpose, and to really grow and to fulfill their potential.
Here we're able to express ourselves freely in the no judgment zone. We're able to share ideas and be able to bounce ideas off of one another to not only make ourselves succeed, but others as well.
Grounded by desire to serve, its founding board members are all military veterans who find that service is just as important, in or out of uniform.
It's about all of us pushing ourselves to give our very best of what all of us have to offer to make our children better and to help their dreams to come true.
God is the one who created us in His image and for a purpose. And in knowing Him, our Links leaders can walk in purpose and learn how to love others well.
Sometimes it appears that there are plenty of reasons to feel doubtful about humanity, but there is a light. There are people devoted to helping others, teaching others, and believing in others. Be a part of the good going on in the world. Join the network. Provide support. Lend your time. Change a life. Link up.
Oh, link up. So tonight we are linking up with one of our Leadership Links ambassadors, a friend, an editor-in-chief of Comet Magazine. She's an author of The Fabric of Character, a wise giver's guide to renewing your social and moral landscape, and the 2020 Emerging Collective Fellow. Ann Snyder also holds a master's degree in journalism from Georgetown University and a bachelor's of arts degree in philosophy and international relations from Wheaton College. She serves as a trustee of the Center for Public Justice, the Hyde Park Institute, and the Collegio Carpenter Innovative Center. And she's an advisor to the Sea Dog Theater. She has published widely, including at the Atlantic Monthly, the Washington Post, the City Journal, Philanthropy Magazine, the Orange County Register, the Houston Business Journal, Bittersweet Monthly, and elsewhere. She writes all the things. So you can check out some of her writing at annsnyder.org. And we thank you. Welcome first, my friend Ann. And we thank you so much for joining us for conversation this evening.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. And between that song and that video, I don't think I need to say anything more. That's really beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Natasha.
Yeah, it's good. We talked about getting ready for tonight, and obviously there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the country. There's a lot of things that people can be doing. And for this part of the book, I wanted to continue the integrity of the conversation that we were having about a lot of layered topics throughout the book, but also wanted to remind people of God's big story, right? That we are not people without hope. Yeah. Even in the midst of the wilderness and history and difficult times. So I'm glad to have a conversation with you tonight about redemption.
Me too. We're not hearing a lot about that these days, and feels far off, but yeah, I'm grateful for the arc.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about tonight?
Well, I just first want to say I have your book right here, and I started reading. I've read it now a couple times, and I read it in part because I had met you in November, and I just was really struck by your poise as an individual, as a woman, but even more deeply as a soul. I don't know if poise is considered a spiritual virtue, but I do feel like there's such a thing as soul poise. And there was just a depth to your bearing that made me want to know more about you. And you had published a book, so it was sort of like a shortcut and we don't live in the same place. But, truth be told, just at a broad level, so I was just, partly the cover was like deeply resonant. And by the cover, I mean the title and the subtitle. I think I may have mentioned this to you, but back when I was in 7th grade in middle school, in a social studies class, we were all asked to pick an exemplar that really stood out to us from the 19th century that we were studying and try to inhabit their context as best we could and reimagine what it might be like to lead their lives through writing a journal as if we were that person. And I picked Sojourner Truth and just read everything I could find as a 13-year-old and tried to understand everything I could. There was just something about her gumption and courage and her escape to freedom, obviously, and then how she led her life in light of that freedom that just like drew something in me that I don't even think at the time I fully understood. And obviously I'm not like Sojourner Truth in so many ways, but the act of trying to read as much as I could and then try to identify with the emotions of what it was to walk her life and try to write it out was like remains. I mean, I even think about this for your Leadership Links girls. That remains probably one of the most certainly memorable, most gripping, formative like school assignments I've ever had. So partly it was just like, I was like, oh my goodness, this is like reminding me of one of the best things I ever did back when I was a wee thing.
That's funny too. Let me ask too, because I forgot to do this for people who, because you're talking about kind of reflecting on, that past life, the formative things, which is where we started the conversation. So I wanted to, before we jump right in, to ask people, because we have a few joining us and I forgot to do this, like where they're dialing in from, what was it that resonated with them about this part of the book, and then what's giving them hope right now. So you can keep on talking, but I want to ask that, and then when people are sharing, then we'll share with everyone.
Okay. So people are like sharing in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they will, I'll check it. Don't worry about it. I'll check it if anything pops up. But I did want to ask that because I forgot that I didn't do that.
Where folks are coming from. Yeah. No, that'd be great. And then honestly, your subtitle, Choosing Freedom and Courage in the Divided World, that actually resonated deeply with me just as an adult these days. And I think particularly the last couple years as much a function of sort of our national context.
Yeah.
Church context more broadly, and then my own sort of vocation. I've found myself, I don't want to say reticently, but somewhat self-doubtingly, in a variety of different leadership positions where there's some public face and, I'm, among other things, like really driven by a drumbeat that believes in bridge building as sort of a Christian call, or at least my particular kind of a part of my call. And I found it's just been a very loud, confusing, pressure-filled last few years of, in my case, I run a magazine, which I love, and it's been an amazing comment. It's been an amazing vehicle to try to do some of that. But we are really in a divided world. So I think anytime I can find an exemplar or even practical toolkits and sort of spiritual practices to sustain grace, to sustain kind of new ways of thinking about, who, okay, you can build bridges, but who ultimately do I need to always be honoring and why? And then what does that mean for how I navigate certain powers and institutions, given my sociological identity and location? So those have all just been very real questions the last couple of years in particular, and particularly I would say this year, since like March, started when the pandemic and then May. Just navigating our fractious era. So that's just what drew me. I just needed your advice, frankly. I needed to learn from someone like you, how do you do that wisely? So that's just sort of broadly speaking what attracted me to the book at large. And we get to talk about the most fun part of the book tonight.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when I was getting dressed, I don't dress up anymore because of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
So I work in pajamas, but when I'm getting dressed for tonight, because it's not appropriate for tonight, I was listening, and I haven't finished, but I was listening to part of the funeral services. You know, we're burying Congressman John Lewis today. And so, you know, I had a full work day, so I couldn't actually watch it live. And so I was starting to watch it, you know, this evening. And so we'll do that tonight and probably continue tomorrow. And so when you were asking kind of like, what is one of those things? First of all, I think it's very redemptive to even ask the question. And I'll be interested too, like people that are joining in, like, what questions are they asking, you know, right now? And to share that with us in the chat, because I think it's a very redemptive thing to be asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we're having conversations and we're not really, they end up being distractions. Like we're not talking necessarily about the most important things. And so I think it's redemptive to ask the right questions. But I also find a great deal of hope and encouragement when I can look at someone like a Congressman John Lewis, right? And so whether we agree about everything, when I look at his character and the way that he lived his life and what motivated him and the sacrificial way that was done, and he did it year after year after year, you know, when it was hard, when he was weary, when it was violent. And so I look at a person like that, and, you know, I've shared about Dr. King being one of the people throughout my life that I continue to look through, not just because I read or watched a documentary, but because his ministry and life work has been really informative in the ways that the things I've been able to do for years of my life. And so obviously that was the same thing with John Lewis. And so I look at a Dr. King ending with like his mountaintop speech. And I look at Congressman Lewis being laid to rest today and leaving us an essay, right, that he wrote before he was passing on, and basically saying in so many words, and we know even from our good book that a person's last words has a lot of weight in the ancient culture. And so, you know, our Savior Jesus left us with, you know, some last words. And so, you know, Martin Luther King left us with some last words, and John Lewis has left us with some last words. And that word from him today was essentially keep pushing, don't give up, you know, keep fighting. And you have inspired me like in these last few days and these last few months when I knew, like I saw the end, I knew I was at the mountaintop and I looked over and you have inspired me. And so when I have days when I'm weary or discouraged or whatever, I go back to those people and their messages and their words. And Jesus, you know, is one of those, because I was writing the other day, like it's so easy to give up hope.
Yeah. Is there, Natasha, when you talk about sort of seeking out, I don't even know what the right metaphor is, just like gems of wisdom and almost like food, like spiritual food, vocational food, does there consistently tend to be a character quality that you just are always drawn to, whether the person is no longer living or is an older exemplar or a peer, that you just kind of, it's sort of your plumb line of, out of the fruits of this person's life, they're going to say something that I just know is trustworthy and true?
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Everybody doesn't tell the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big theme, you know, for the book, but that's also a big theme in my life. Like I hate lying because you know, my mother, one of the things my mother used to say, she said, if you lie, you cheat, you steal. If you steal, you'll kill. Right. And so her whole thing is like, you just one step away. And so it's one of those things of just kind of keeping your character. Right. Because if you
that's the underside of the links, right?
Yeah. If you compromise, then you get comfortable compromising. And it's easier for you to let another thing down, to let another thing go. And so for me, and my husband will tell you, like, it's one of the pet peeves, like for me to be a person of integrity means that you're telling the truth. And so it's not just about whether you're lying or telling the truth. It's also like, do you follow through on your commitments?
Right.
Right? The things that you say you're going to do you do those things? You know, if you don't, do you take ownership for it? Do you make excuses for not doing it? So all those things to me is about having a posture of truth telling. But I think the other part of that is like, do you love people? And I have come to observe that not everybody loves people. Like, but I love people.
Yeah.
I do. I'm fascinated by people. Like my husband, one of the things we do, and my daughter she said we be judgy or we be something. And it's like, we're not, but like, I'm fascinated. Like when I'm out people watching. So my husband and I, like, we're walking in the park or we're eating at or whatever. And because we observe people, we'll just kind of like set the scenario up, right? Or we're talking about
make up the life story.
Yeah, right. And she'll be like, what are y'all talking about? We was like, babe, we've been watching this for a while. Like, and so it's just funny, but I am fascinated by people. And so I watch people to learn from them. But I watch them because there are things in people that are just fascinating, I think. And I genuinely love people. Like, I'm kind of person, like, you have to work to get me to not like you.
Right. I won't work that hard, Natasha.
Yeah. What you said?
I said I won't work that hard with you.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah, I mean, because like when I'm done, right? I still love you, but it's like, you're not my person. Like, I'm not going to continue to invest, that type of thing. But generally, I'm coming into a relationship open.
Yeah. Yeah. This is maybe more, and I know we're kind of mutual here in our, like, you don't mind that I ask you some questions too, right?
No, go ahead.
Okay. This is probably a very live wire question for you right now, and maybe I would guess like certainly sensitive. I mean, I feel it's sensitive for me, but there's like qualities of relationship that cross all characteristics of who a person is by these identifying qualities that, whether your race, your culture, your gender, where you fit in the hierarchy of some organization, what neighborhood you live in, all these things, right? And I think when I was younger, like you, I also love people. And sometimes that puts me in a bit of a misfit in the publishing world, just because you're much more embedded in words only a lot of the time. But I still view, that's why I often am thinking in terms of voices, because I think somehow there's something about a voice that is a little bit more whole person and what people can bring to a very serious issue or debate or whatever. But anyways, I have a friend and mentor actually who's in the 70s who talks about like these rules of relationships that are universal, and forgiveness is a piece. There's 5 of them, and I'm not gonna go through them all right now, but I'm just sort of curious, when you talk about trustworthiness, telling the truth, also I would say sort of consistency, showing up, like there's just like certain relational things. Have those bedrock principles of healthy relationships been tested or challenged or complexified across racial lines? Like, I think of you as someone who has always sought, I mean, I know this from your book, and I know this a little from knowing you, has sought cross-cultural, cross-racial relationships as like a matter of being a member, being a Christian. I mean, probably for many reasons, for your own growth, for your own, and how you can help others, et cetera. The richness of what it is to be human, and delight in one another's differences and overlap, et cetera. I'm just curious if those sort of bedrock principles of relationships almost need some asterisks around them right now in this really fraught time.
Yeah, well, I'm hanging with the people I've been hanging with.
Yeah, right. So there's a bedrock.
Which is fairly diverse. And I say fairly because I think we can all do better with our cross-cultural relationships. I was just meeting with a friend this morning who's Asian American, Korean American, and a few days ago it was you, and a few days ago it was someone else. And so I have a fairly diverse circle of friends, but I think all of us can do better with that. But what I've found for me, and I think about this first, when I think about the theme of redemption, is God has said that when all is said and done, those who belong to him will be coming from every tribe, language, nation, and people group. So there's a diversity, a racial, ethnic diversity, what we would think, a cultural diversity within God's family, within the body of Christ that I welcome.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in saying that, you have people who say that and don't understand what that means. And part of what I mean is like being together in a bridge builder does not mean assimilation.
Right.
It doesn't mean sameness. That's not what harmony is. When you have harmony in music or a band, like everyone's playing every instrument and section, they're playing different notes. And so those different notes come together in all their mess. And what starts out as noise when you're just learning the music can become something very beautiful if you practice.
Yeah.
Right? If you practice. And so there are people that I practice with. And so I am in relationships with people who practice. And so everybody is on different parts of their journey. So we're not all in the same place, but we're all on a journey to practicing. I'm not in a lot of relationships with people who are not practicing, because then it's a professional relationship and you need to get some coaching, right? And then you can pay for that, right? But we're not in relationship. We're not friends in that way. And so I think that's important. But I also think that we have to be more honest in the things that we name and taking ownership for what is ours to do. Yeah. And so I think particularly in this time, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, there is a lot of call for elevating the voices of people of color. I think that's a consistent thing that needs to happen across the board. And it is not the responsibility of people of color to do the homework for white people. Right? So when we're elevating these voices, that we are, to your point, buying their books and reading their books. And then we're having those conversations with our circle of friends and our family members who maybe have not started the journey or are early in the journey, because that's your responsibility. That's what you need to take ownership of. That's where you have loyalty and trust. And that's where you have an opportunity to influence. So you go and buy the books, you get the training, you watch the documentary, you correct the incomplete or uninformed history that you've learned. And then you go back and you take that to your people, to your community. And then that way, when we're getting to a place to have these multi-ethnic relationships, these bridge building relationships, these interactions in the workplace, these churches that are more diverse, that we are safe people for people who are different than us to be in relationship with.
Yeah. Yeah. And the trust will be held and protected. Yeah. And,
right.
And honored. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're thinking about redemption, first in light of, kind of some of the things that maybe jumped out to you from the book, but also in light of where we are right now, it just doesn't feel that redeemable to some people.
Yeah.
What is the thing that's inspiring you?
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer that. Can I go back just a little bit to what you were just saying? Because you kind of, I think you're touching on, frankly, my own learning curve, both as a quote unquote leader and actually as an editor. I don't even think of myself really that way. I sort of prefer this hosting. Like I love to cook. I naturally love having people over. So I sort of, the hosting hospitality metaphor has always just been more how I think of it. But I've never associated that until the last year with some feedback that's come my way with power. Last year, when I became editor of this magazine, and I was just wanting to both honor its heritage and legacy, but also freshen up sort of have it really be equipping the future of the church as I so hope, well, as I believe the church already is, but sort of shift who the gatekeepers were of quote unquote like Christian sort of theological, these are the main theological arguments and these are the main issues people of faith need to be concerned about in the public square. I just thought the sort of choir of voices that was sort of doing public theology as best they could were very beleaguered, defensive, fearful, people who look like me for the most part. And I, for a variety of reasons related mostly just to life experience, I grew up overseas. I mean, I don't want to get into my whole autobiography, but a lot of my own faith formation has really not been in the white American church. And so I think kind of naively, I just like tried to present this like very joyful vision of in the US context, and this is across Catholic, Protestant, and even Orthodox lines. So I was trying to be also deeply ecumenical, like come one, come all. We need all of you. We need you if you're disabled. We need you if you're a mother staying at home. We need you. I was deeply shaped by some Vietnamese Jesuits and some Nigerian Pentecostals in my years in Houston. My initial years as a Christian were in all Korean Bible studies, and so my life, and then sort of the way in which the Black church has like deeply deepened my, so out of almost as an ode of like deep frustration that the broader world of sort of Christian literary whatever was so narrow, I sort of sent out this call of my hope for this magazine is that we expand into being a place, and there's many other places, but a table, and I use that metaphor where we might all not sing as one, but sing in a choir together. And that might mean at times there's jostling, etc. So I kind of sent out gave this talk, wrote an editorial. It was sort of like, you're launching a fresh leadership vision. And I will say most white folks, especially if they were like right of center politically and theologically, in a way I didn't realize I was writing it to them, but I guess I was. Like they thought, they were moved, they were sort of persuaded. There was a sense of like, okay, this is something about this rings true. And there was almost like conviction a little bit. I had a good friend who's actually originally from Sierra Leone, but grew up in the US, write me at first a note that I found quite just upsetting. And she was just like, well, I appreciate that you're being an unapologetic bridge builder, Anne, but how are you going to atone for the ways in which white supremacy has impacted some of your own decisions? And it was sort of like a 10-question, very hard hitting, friend to friend, but challenge. And there was an element of sort of, and that she was probably the strongest, but there were others. And I think what I have so far to go, I think in learning, but this is getting to the redemption piece. But, I think some of us, we think of phrases like bridge building and alliance building, et cetera. And up until recently, those of us who think joyfully in those terms, and we do have a humility about it, I think, but we forget the heart. We leave out the atonement piece, and we don't quite know how to do that, actually, even institutionally or procedurally. And this is a meandering way to just get to one thing that really jumped out at me from the beginning of your redemption chapter or fourth part of the book. And I know you're going off of the wilderness section, so that's sort of a motif that's very, obviously laden throughout the Old and New Testaments. But you say, just the honesty you had. You just said, death comes before resurrection. And we don't like to talk about that much. And, I think the evangelical world can sometimes get very criticized. This is more in the context of pure theology, but get criticized for focusing so much on resurrection, but never dwelling in Good Friday and Holy Saturday, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Just more broadly in the Christian American context, that's just sort of, and not to make a downer, because I do think the redemption chapter, it really does get to a timpani of hope. But
Yeah.
practically speaking, I think a lot of what I'm wondering these days is, okay, there's already been way too many literal deaths
Yeah.
that should have called for some resurrection a long time ago from
Yeah.
a racial perspective.
Yeah.
But what position, what needs dying? And in some ways, this 2020 presents like an amazing opportunity to really face those realities and ask. I mean, you talk about asking the right questions, like what needs dying and or hospicing in our institutions and so on. And I would just love, I mean, that's a library's worth of exploration. But that your beginning so honestly at the very beginning of the redemption chapter in that regard was both like very bracing, very biblical, and also I think prompts what does that actually mean in my life?
Yeah.
Right?
I think you're
Thank
asking,
you for that.
yeah, I think you're asking like a lot of the right questions about power.
Yeah.
I would say also about wealth, about, I would say white supremacy. I think that's stuff we need to name, because I think one of the things that is problematic for us in our country about talking honestly about race, for example, is that we look back to slavery, for those of us who, have done some digging beyond our elementary school, middle school education, and we look back to the civil rights movement, and we have in our minds to some degree what we think white supremacy looks like. Yeah. So if it's not whipping humans, if it's not sicking dogs on them, if it's not a fire hose, then if it's not publicly physically violent, then I'm certainly not that, right? And I'm not talking about that exclusively, because that's only a part of it, right? What we're talking about systemically, and this is where I think it's good that you've chosen the word power, is when you look at every, let's say there are categories that shape culture and society. One of them will be like the family. Another one would be religion. Another would be government. Another would be media and arts. Another one would be education. Another one would be, corporate, whatever business. But in every structure that holds a society up in our country, it's led by white people, and specifically white men, even the church. And so that is a mindset of a systemic social reality of white supremacy, that is what's first, that is where the money, who holds the power with the money, and the decisions that are made in all of those spheres by those people who, when you get to that high level, are often not in relationship with these diverse groups of people that we're talking about, but they're making decisions that's going to impact the lives of everybody else. Yeah. And so it's interesting in this wilderness when you said, and I'm calling this a wilderness where we're in right now with this pandemic, where there are opportunities. I believe there are opportunities, but I think the other part of that is the reality that we came into this wilderness where there was a significant wealth gap between, white people and Black and brown people. And of course, you start entering in other things like education and, social location, where people live and all those things. And then that just kind of widens it. But that was already happening. And I think the sad, unfortunate thing here is that gap is widening still, right? So this is actually taking something that was already bad and horrible and could potentially make it worse. with people, with the unemployment rate being the way it is, people losing their jobs the way they have, people not earning a fair wage for their families and all these things. And that's not even talking about, some of the poor children that are out of school and losing education and, all the stuff that comes with that. But my point with all of that is when we say what has to change is that has been our norm from our country's founding.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that does not change, then we're going to get what we've always gotten, which is a country where the norm is for certain people to thrive and others not to thrive. And then when the few that thrives out of a system that's not intent for them to thrive, then we use those few as we hold them up and say, why can't the rest of y'all be like them? Mm-hmm. Right. Without acknowledging the systemic structures and injustice for this reality to happen for a certain group of people in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is a problem.
Right. I've been struck, especially like maybe since the whole last year, say starting a year ago. I speaking both as a person of Christian faith and then now as someone who's kind of learned America later, partly because I didn't grow up here for the first decade of my life. Though of course, teenage, I am American. I spent most of my life here. Now, why is it that we don't, and by we, I mean both Christians and Americans, and I would say especially probably white Christian Americans, it's almost like we have no muscles, whether they be mental muscles, spiritual muscles, theological muscles even, actually very much so theological muscles, to grapple with kind of the corporate nature of sin, both as it is historic, as it is horizontal. And I've been thinking about that recently. It struck me. So a lot of my work up until the last year has been like, I've just always been drawn to what I call like glimmering communities, like communities that are just really healthy. And sometimes they exist within an institution. A lot of the time they don't. And this can be former, men and women who have spent 20 years in prison, but suddenly like morally transform one another. Probably, I haven't actually met your darling, girls yet from Leadership Links, but I bet were I to meet that group, just everything I smell from what you all are doing, it's like, there's something very special going on communally. And for a variety of reasons, I just have always tried to figure out, how do we reknit our social fabric and sort of looked at the positive side of, we have individualism, how do we weave? And there's a lot of questions around that these days, but I think more recently I've wondered, well, there's an underside to that as well. And, I'm in some worlds vocationally where we think a lot about, how do we reknit our bonds of attachment to one another as citizens or whatever, and recognize our interdependence as human beings. And I think I've just been struck by how we're at, for all that we long to weave, I sometimes wonder, well, maybe we should allow things to actually sort of truly unravel, which is a bit of a dangerous thing to say, because I don't want people to be so lonely they're killing themselves, which has been happening, but where we kind of see the studs of how we've really dishonored our inherent interdependence from the beginning. And then we can maybe build from a greater place of truth. And so just, I don't know if I'm quite, I think this is very much a pathology that specifically plagues like white American Christians. We're taught to think so in personal responsibility terms, obviously the individual story of salvation. And there's a piece of that, I think is true. It's not a Bible verse, but I always love the phrase like God has no grandchildren. Like I think there is something to that relationship that is personal, but on sort of the darker side, why do we have so much trouble dealing with sin of a collective nature? And you can, Jewish traditions still have the Day of Atonement and so on. I would say a lot of the time my experience of it is just more, it's a ritual. It's not necessarily always, but still some rituals would even be helpful, right? At the starting point. So I said a lot there, but I just like in response to what you're saying, it's just, looking at the underside of our collective body and learning to be okay with seeing our own, how we're implicated in other people's behavior, whether before or now.
Yeah, and I think it's this is a place where we have an opportunity. There's an African proverb, and I quote it somewhere in the book about it takes a village to raise a child, right? And so, there's a real reality that there are some cultures that are primary cultures, and there's some cultures that are secondary cultures, and that impacts how we interact with people. It impacts how we view work and projects. It impacts how we communicate with people, the methods of communication that we use. And so, all of that is very much cultural. And so part of our Americanism is individualism, right? It is, pull yourself up by your own bootstrap. It is, you can have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if you work hard enough for it, right? And not even thinking about, and so when people don't get to those things, then the automatic assumption is, well, they didn't work hard enough, right? And so that's more of a myth than it is a reality. Whereas, someone who comes from a culture that is communal, so African American, Black culture is very communal. Latina culture, it's very communal. Indigenous people, their culture, and so they're. And this is what I'm saying is that when we are in relationship with people, these are things that maybe we didn't get, that we didn't grow up with, that we can actually glean and learn from. And it can be a blessing in our lives, because here's the thing, we can learn a new way of dealing with each other and with dealing with people that are different than us. We can learn a new way. And so as a Black woman, a large part of my work and motivation here at Leadership Links, specifically with our programming, starting with middle and high school girls, and most of those girls being Black, is because I know what they're up against. And I know that they're going to not just need each other, which they do, but they need mentors and sponsors. And I know that if they're able to get those things in a community, then prayerfully they will not only invest back to the community and do that for other people that come behind them here, but that they will also do that wherever God sends them. That they will be the people who are influencing and investing and mentoring and sponsoring other people when they get to those leadership positions, and they get those seats and they building those tables that we are preparing them to occupy. And so that's a very communal thing, because here's the thing, I've already done the work. Like I already have the degrees, right? I already have the accolades. I already, did the jobs. I done gave up more money than I made in the last decade, because for me, it's always about a we. It's always about an us. It's always about, one of our core values is network. So my daughter's going to be okay. But my daughter also relishes in the relationships that she has with the peers that she's met in this organization and the adults that have become like family to her in this organization. And she's the only child. And so perhaps more than other people who have kids running around all the time, that she knows that she needs that. But here's the thing. There's a confidence that rises up in a child. I just published my article with you today. But there's a confidence that rises up in a child who's not just fully loved and affirmed and supported, but then when they know that they have people that they can depend on. And so that is a support. And this is where network is so important. It's not just about business cards and making deals and shaking hands on the tables. It's like, who are your people? So if someone were to come and beat one of our kids, you got a lot of people to contend with, right? Because that kid is not going to go away silently. A lot of people in this network will make a lot of noise because that's one of our kids. And so part of this communal thing that you're saying, when we start thinking about these issues that we're addressing, it's not just is everything good with me and my family and my job, in my neighborhood, in my church. But when you see the stuff happening in the street and you see these kids not getting what they need in the classroom, how you going to do virtual learning? You don't even have internet in your home, right? And there are people all around within 15, 30 minutes. You may be in another neighborhood, but you right down the street that can take action. This is your opportunity, we're seeing. And this is the redemptive thing, right? You have an opportunity to do something and not just be sitting around and complaining about the stuff you see on TV and the news and social media. Like, what are you doing? This is our service core value. Like, where are you showing up?
Yeah.
Put your skin in the game, raise your voice, put some money on the table to be part of the change.
Yeah. Amen. I have nothing to add, Natasha. No way can I follow that.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, one thing I loved in your redemption part of this book, and I'm going to quote, you actually quoted, very moving this part, you quoted Toni Morrison. Just read it briefly, and you said, so your section where you're talking about writing to live, which as a fellow writer, I was very moved by. You say, acclaimed author Toni Morrison took ownership of her words. She rejected the perceived need for African Americans to respond to the white gaze or the white oppressor. She said, what is the world like if he's not there? ... There was this free space opened up by refusing to respond every minute to somebody else's gaze. And then you go on to sort of talk about that in your own life, and who you actually write for. And well, I'll quote you then a little while later. You say, I've come to understand that for me, writing is a spiritual discipline, a therapy of sorts. It is one of the ways that I communicate with God. Over the past few years, I've committed to writing my way to freedom, casting a new vision, planning and strategizing a way of living and being as a disciple of Christ in a fallen world. A disciple who is fully Black, fully woman, fully known, fully loved, and fully empowered by the Holy Spirit. Every day, I choose to live free, ! And I mean, those are really powerful words, yours and Toni Morrison's, and also poignant words. And I think we all have our own stories of feeling like we're just operating under someone else's gaze, and that affects the way, it affects our light, right? Can you shine full light or not freely? And I think about that with your girls, and trying to give them a space where they can fully both explore who they could be, but also explore who they are, that they may not in all contexts, be able to do. And I just was, I was thinking about like your bold naming and just conviction and commitment to being fully you. Though of course you have to, we all live in different contexts, and I'm sure you're very cross-cultural, so you do that, and you shape probably how you are in different contexts in an honoring way. But I was just sort of curious if you could talk about this idea of the gaze and being seen, and how much, or not seen. And, I sometimes look at our country more broadly, and I think, part of one of our huge issues is like increasingly so few of us feel properly seen. Some people feel canceled, or some people feel, so I believe like there's something in your soul that I think there's like a strength to you that can like fully lean into all of these aspects of who you are. But could you just maybe reflect as honestly as you can in this forum on, and to me, like how the effects of who you're seen by in a given platform, in a given space, a forum, kind of affects your own boldness, freedom, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't know if it affects my boldness or freedom. I think that's a layered question. So, on one hand, there's a lot of ways to be seen, right? I mean, we have people that are millionaires right now because they have decided to be seen, right? And so if you want to be seen, right, there are ways to be seen. And so when I think about that, the performance of social media, the performance of sensationalism. I'm not at all interested in being seen. When I think about me personally, like I'm a pretty private person, right? So the people who know me, they know me. And the people who don't, so that could be somebody on social media, I don't feel that I necessarily have to, and this is something like people are trying to talk to me, trying to coach me better about like marketing, right? On social media, because I really don't care about it, right? Like, not that it's not important, but what's important to me is that the work that I've done, gets seen and put out. And for that reason, I show up on social media. But I'm not showing up on social media for you to see all in my house and know what's going on with my family and, and my marriage. I just like, that's not something I am interested in at all. But I think, one of the things Toni Morrison is writing about is when you're constantly showing up, and the thing that's at the forefront of your mind is what other people say or how other people perceive you, then you will never show up as your full self.
Right.
And so one of the things I was writing about in the book, like I'm Black. I was born Black. I'm gonna die Black. I'm always gonna be Black. Right. I'm not going to be less Black. So I was talking about even something like my hair, I started putting chemicals in my hair, or my parents did, at a very young age, because the white gaze said that was more presentable. It was more, they would say it was more manageable, but before we had the white gaze, we was managing it fine. Yeah. Right. So it was to be more presentable by society. And then when I had my Black daughter, and she had never had chemicals in her hair, and I had thoughts of taking the chemicals out of my hair for years before, and when my daughter had her natural hair, and it was fine. And then all of a sudden, one day, it wasn't. She's going to school with these little white kids, and she wants her hair to look like theirs. And I'm like, absolutely not. And that's when I cut my hair off to start all back over. Because we're not going to do that.
Right.
And so now you couldn't pay her to want to put, she loves it. And as she should.
Yeah.
Right. As she should. And so it's something as, you could think as simple as your hair, but for us and for me, that was a huge, it's a huge thing. And, I think about even somebody like, Sojourner Truth that we talked about. I think for years, primarily when I was 13, like what you're talking about, what I knew and what I remember about Sojourner Truth was, the Ain't I a Woman thing. And then when I started to read and learn more about her life, it's like, number one, she didn't say that, right? That these were words that were put into her mouth by the person who wrote the article about the speech that she did, but those words were not spoken by her. They were not in the speech. But then, so that was a way they presented her to say, this is a dark-skinned, poor, formerly enslaved, tall woman speaking boldly to a white crowd, basically making a defense of herself, of her womanhood, not even her Blackness, her womanhood. But that's not only what she said, but then you read about her life and you realize that the life is so much more fascinating than the gaze that was presented. And that's what's been elevated over history, right? And when I look at that and I look at, wait a minute, not only this lady, I would hate to say run away, but she, fought for her own freedom, but she went to court for herself, for her son, and won. She beat legislators twice. She basically became an entrepreneur. She became a preacher. Like she was, and all of this, and she was illiterate.
Right.
Right. And so on one hand, my thought is, This is a woman who, once she came to walk in the fullness of how God created her,
Yeah.
it exceeded whatever gaze they had, because she was just being. And that's what's important to me,
Yeah.
right? I'm just being
Yeah.
the person. So I want to grow more depth into the person that God has created me to be.
Mm-hmm.
If I do that, if I attend to that, then what I do will reflect.
Yeah.
And how people receive that, that's on them. That's not on me.
Right.
You know, I have to tend to the things that, and steward the things that God has for me to do. And so that's what's important to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I could make myself a 13-year-old right now and just follow you in your leadership. Yeah.
But let me do this. We're
All ages. That's really good.
That's a good first part of the conversation. Let's do this. So we have a few people joining us. If you have questions for us, start sharing those questions now. We're going to break for a few announcements, and we have some new announcements. So you want to be attentive to the announcements. We have some exciting opportunities for youth. So we want to make sure we share that. But we're going to take about 5 minutes or so for announcements. So if you have any questions, quotes, anything, for Ann or myself that you want us to address out of the book, share that in the chat box for Zoom. Or if we're on Facebook, we'll see if we have any questions from Facebook as well. And if not, Ann, we'll just come and we'll continue the conversation. But let me share some things that we have coming up. So if you're wanting to continue the redemption conversation, I want to encourage you to check out my podcast, A Sojourner's Truth. Season 1, we focus all on the book. And so these last 3 episodes do that. And the last one features my daughter, so you can check that out as well. The Sojourner's Truth podcast is available on Spotify, and it's also available on iTunes. And so these episodes features Janie Mines. Janie Mines is a mentor of mine, a friend. She was the first in the first class of women to graduate from the Naval Academy, but she's also was the only Black woman in that class. So she's the first Black woman to graduate from the United States Naval Academy. So we're featuring her there. And then we have Dr. Michelle Johnson, who's an educator, a head of school at one of our partner schools, one of the schools in our Links network. And she is sharing about the redemption that she's seeing in the community. And then we have another one of our Links leaders, Mrs. Chase Chance, who just turned 16, celebrated her sweet 16 yesterday. And so happy belated birthday, Mrs. Chase. But she has her own 501c3 nonprofit. So there's another Black woman-led nonprofit that we are supporting. And so she was featured in talking about the redemption that she is being a party of in serving our core value of service, serving her community as well. So I encourage you to check out those episodes if you want to continue the conversation about this part of the book. Then we have right now nationwide a girls essay contest. And this essay contest is for middle and high school girls beginning at 6th grade. We're offering a cash reward for middle school and for high school. And if you go and visit our website and look under the leadership initiatives, or there's a website there, a web page for the essay competition. So we can encourage you to check that out. That's available until August 10th. So you got a few days to share that broadly. And we would love to have any girls that you know complete that application. And then we're getting pumped for our Links mentoring program. This year, for obvious reasons, we're going to do the program virtually. And so we will get that information up on our social media, most likely our website, by the end of next week. So it'll be available in August. We're going to do our orientation on August 15th. And so we'll share that with those of you that have subscribed to our newsletter. We will share that with you, the dial-in information and all that with you. But we encourage you to join us there. And then you will register in August, and space will be limited. So that's rising 6th to 12th grade girls. Space will be limited. And so we will keep it open until our slots are filled, and then we will close that. And so we want you to share that too with those that might be interested in joining our mentoring program this year. And then we are a praying people. We are a family that prays together and stays together. And so we pray every Saturday. Every third Saturday of the month. So that's the third Saturday of the month, every third Saturday at the same dial-in information and access code. Our next prayer call is going to be on August 15th. And we would love for you to mark your calendars and join us for that. And then, as some of you know, if you joined us previously, that we were prepared to go on our first Global Leadership Experience Tour this summer, which unfortunately we've had to postpone. And so hopefully by the end of the year, we are hoping to reschedule that for next summer. And we are still fundraising towards that with the anticipation of going. And so if you feel so led, given the things that we talked about tonight, and want to know how you can get involved, then we would encourage you to visit our website and donate there, and or email us and find out how you can support this particular initiative. I will say this too, that next month on August 28th, we are coming up on our 5-year anniversary. And so we will be sharing some information throughout the month of August on our social media channels about some of our initiatives with that to help us celebrate that. And we would love for you to join us. So this is how you can link up with us, as we say. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and we have a YouTube channel that we would love to customize, but we need to get to 100 subscribers to do that. So if you search Leadership Links on Inc. on YouTube, it will pop up and you can subscribe right there. We will encourage you to do that. We also want to invite you to add our board secretary's email to your email address to make sure that when we send you a newsletter, if you subscribe, that you will get it in your inbox and it's not going to your spam or junk folder. And of course, you could always visit our website. We try to keep everything updated there, and you should get the first information there. Lastly, you may be thinking about, how can I get involved? I want to support Leadership Links. Well, on our website, we have a volunteer page. We call it Service Opportunities because service is one of our core values. So you can go to the Links Network tab, click Service Opportunities, and it'll take you 10 minutes, no more than 15, to fill out this volunteer application. We would love for you to do that. And so we'll have one of our volunteers review that, and then circle back with you if there's something that would be beneficial, mutually beneficial for us. And if you're interested in mentoring, whether that's being a guest speaker or actually serving the young girls in our organization, then you can complete the separate mentor interest form as well on the same page. These are some of our organizational needs right now. Like, we need these things: marketing, graphic support, technology support, video support, administration support. So if any of those things appeal to you, you can just fill out the volunteer form and let us know that if you're skilled or passionate about any of those things, and just let us know. And when we get that information, we will have someone follow up. So those are the things that we have going on right now. Let me get back to Ann. Let's see if there are any questions. If there are any questions, we will take those. So let me see if there are any questions coming in. Let's see. I see something in the... Okay, no questions on Facebook. All right, do we have any questions from our participants on Zoom? Any questions, anybody? Okay.
It's late July.
Huh?
I said it's late July.
Look.
Brains are...
I get it. Well, and we got a few minutes. So do you have any other questions or anything else you would like to share before we do our Leadership Links Creed? Because we always like to ask questions.
Yeah, I love that creed. Well, there's a few other things that I'm happy to talk about from your book, and just
sure.
And one thing I love, I can't wait to meet your girls, hopefully in the next year. I just think for anyone listening, Leadership Links is just a very special organization, and like really building a pipeline of amazing women in the future. So just think there's an element of character development, and I just the sort of way you think about the intergenerational community, and you put a lot more sort of meaning and goodness in the word network than I think a lot of us think of it as. So anyways, give an extra plug from where I sit. Yeah, so let's see, there was one other thing I had written down. If you don't mind, I was going to go back and just ask you, I loved this paragraph that I mentioned, but I didn't read, about what, who you write for and why. And I'm gonna, let's see, it's on page 160, read real quick. You say, I don't just write for myself, I use my pen, or mostly the keys of my laptop, as a weapon of war, to resist, to affirm our common humanity, and to defend it. I write for communities who are downtrodden and in desperate need of the liberation that only God can provide. I write for people whose conscience tells them that something is not right, but in humility can confess that they don't know what to do about all the brokenness. I write for people who long to embrace the love of Jesus, but are perplexed by the hypocrisy of his church. I write for the people who are committed to figuring it out together. What if we all learned a new way? And what if we were not afraid? What if we truly lived redeemed? And yeah, you should amen your own words.
Girl.
That's a beautiful paragraph. One of my heroes is a woman by the name of Dorothy Day, who you may know. She founded something called the Catholic Worker Movement in the early part of the 20th century. And she was a journalist and then wound up living in voluntary poverty during the height of the Great Depression in New York City, and then created these hospitality houses all over the US, and there's some overseas as well. But she wrote a newspaper from this, and she always said writing is an act of community. And I think that's like very hard to feel sometimes in this pandemic virtual reality, where it's much more easy to feel like you're in a platform. And I've sort of created a little platform this year, but that's good. I don't know if you felt that, but there's a sense of like, who is the who that I'm trying to impart something to, both for myself and then hopefully relationally with the other person. So anyways, I just wanted to read that out loud because I just loved it as a human and deeply kind of relational missional act.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I tell people all the time, like when I'm preparing even like a talk, if I'm giving a keynote address, like I'm preaching to myself first. So you say amen yourself, like I do. I do amen. Because again, sometimes there's a song, we began with a gospel song this evening, but there's a song by Donald Lawrence, and the song title is Encourage Yourself. And the lyrics begin with, sometimes you have to encourage yourself. And so I practice that. Because, there's not always people around to encourage you, or people don't understand, what it is that you're wrestling with. And so, and I actually think this part about like, what if we found a new way? Like, what if we all live to redeem? I think these are good questions for the wilderness.
Right questions.
I think they're good questions for the wilderness. It's good questions for where we're living right now, and the way we are required to live or not live. And I think I'm hoping for a lot of people that this new reality is helping us understand what's important, what we value, who are our people, who do we want to teach and influence, who do we want to learn from. All these things are extremely important for our life, for us being decent human beings, but also I think for our spiritual formation.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. No, I'm writing that down. I have a little, you were asking me at the outset, like, why do I still ground myself in some redemption narrative, or how to bring hope? And, it's very cliche, the whole 1 Corinthians 13 passage about love, but I just like, it's powerful stuff, and it's like spoken at every wedding. So sometimes you're like, okay, I know the hallmark. The hallmark part of that biblical.
Yeah.
But the last, you know, what line, or not the last, but embedded in there, this phrase, you know, love bears all things, believes all things,
Hopes all
hopes all
things,
things,
endures all
all
things.
things. This
Love
has been
never
a love
fails.
bar for me, and I wonder, I think we all in our different locations where we are as we navigate, you know, as we seek peace, as we also seek honesty and truth, and there is an element of very holy impatience also needing to meet a certain kind of holy patience, and different ones of us probably need to inhabit different of those virtues and postures. And I just think there's something in that infinite capacity of love that ultimately, at least for me, has to be sort of inspired by God's, whose love is much greater and more trustworthy than my own, to just give me grace for this moment, for others in this moment. And that's really where my hope is in that like endless, bottomless pit and force really.
Yeah, so we can land our thing right here on Paul, because Paul does sum this up for us well. You know, he says, now abides faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Hold on, let's see. Please consider, what are we considering? Putting together a playlist to accompany each section of your book for those of us, especially not familiar.
Great idea.
So first of all, is it Mary Claire? Let me tell you, Mary Claire, I have done this for you. And so I'm going to see if I can, I don't know how to, let me do this. If you go to my YouTube, so youtube.com/Natasha Sistrunk Robinson, I have a Sojourner's Truth playlist right there. And what I did, I put the playlist there because music is very inspirational to me. And so I've referenced several songs throughout the book, as you know, for those of you who have read all of it. And so those songs are on that playlist. And then there are other songs that I thought were part of the narratives and the themes of the book that I've included. And then within the last couple of years, there's some other great songs that have come out that I thought, this really speaks to the heart of the book. So I have a playlist for you right there on YouTube, Mary Claire. So you can check that out and be blessed by it. Thanks. So you would enjoy that. Let me speak to that song that we shared tonight, and then I'm gonna wrap up with what I was saying to you. And unless anybody has questions, we have a few more minutes. So if you have questions, we're glad to take them. But the song that we started with tonight, For Every Mountain, I mentioned this briefly early in the book, but when I was in the gospel choir, when I was a student at the Naval Academy, we sung that song a lot. And when we sung that song, we sung it in rehearsal. And when I tell you, mostly Black kids at the Naval Academy, everybody came every Tuesday night. We had gospel choir with a different burden, right? It could be a burden of maybe I'm not going to pass this test, or I did poorly on this, exam, or this paper, or I didn't make the cut on the sports team, or Lord forbid, I didn't pass them swim tests, because the swim test was requirements for graduation, and jumping off that 10-meter diving board. I mean, these were things every week. And that's just the stuff that was happening at school. That's not talking about, for many of us, when we went back and thought about what was happening in our families, in our homes, that were barely making it sometimes, or, things just weren't right. It was hard. So we were bringing all these burdens every Tuesday night, the gospel choir, and we would sing songs like this that would lift us up. And then the choir will often tour in the country as part of our diversity outreach initiatives for the Naval Academy with the missions office. And so we would go to Black churches and different things and sing this song. And when I tell you, Black people lost their minds when they heard us singing this song. And then we lost our minds, because it was not about some mountain way out there. It's like, God just got me over that mountain. And then next week, it was like another mountain and another mountain. And so it began like for every mountain. Right? And so that song has a lot of depth for me. And so I'm glad for those of you that have heard it for the first time. And, maybe if you didn't even hear all the words, to go look up the lyrics for that song. It's very simple, but very profound. Mm-hmm. So that's that. But closing on Paul, faith, hope, love, these three. And what we forget is that the Bible was originally written, in pieces on these scrolls, right? So they weren't written in the way that we're reading it now on nice paper with chapter breakdown and verses breakdown. And so these chapter and verses breakdown are for us to find the text, but they weren't in, the actual scripts. So what we see in, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where Paul is talking about the body, using the body as a metaphor for the church. And then he goes to say, well, a hand can't say to an eye, I don't need you. And the eye, the foot can't say to the whatever, like, I don't need you. And that's one thing, that for all of us, like, we need each other. But then the other thing he goes on to write to say, those who are weak among us, we should bestow a higher honor, right? That's what he says in the text, that we should bestow a higher honor for those who are weak among us. And so that's a practice that we have to learn, because our culture doesn't tell us to do that. Our culture tells us to ignore people that we perceive are weak, whether that's a gender person or a person who's not able-bodied, or an elderly person, or a child, right? Our culture, because they become a distraction and an inconvenience. But Paul says we should bestow these among us with higher honor. And then he goes on and continues to write, this is why you do it, because we are people that don't want to be out here making noise, crashing cymbal and sounding gong and just having words, but those words not following up with our actions. He's like, because if you're making a whole bunch of noise, but your actions don't reveal that you're a person of faith, if they don't reveal that you're a person who's hopeful, if they don't reveal that you're a person filled with love, then it really amounts to nothing. It amounts to nothing. So he said, now abide faith, hope, love, these three. The greatest of these is love. And then he goes into that great love refrain, which we appreciate, which we have as our first core value. And that's why I was ending on that point, because we're always teaching and training around here at Leadership Links. My friend, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope, thank you all that joined us this evening. I hope that it's been a blessing for you, and that even for this entire series, now that you've read the book, now that you participate in the series, now that you have a podcast, you have 3 resources. We are a leadership education organization. So there are 3 free resources that we have made available to you, where you can now take these conversations and have them with other people. You have a book to read with some questions. You have some videos that y'all can watch. You have some podcasts that you can listen to. So gather your people. Have a coffee chat, have a book club, have a small group discussion, do it with your family, do it with your church, do it in your workspace, do it with your friends. And you can do it virtually. That's the other beautiful thing. So you can gather all kinds of people to have some important conversations. And so we have equipped you to do that this evening and throughout this series. And so I want to thank you all for joining us. We don't take it for granted. There's a lot you can be doing with your time, and you've decided to spend that time with us. And so I hope that you have been inspired, that you've been encouraged by it, that you are motivated to go and live redeemed. We want to thank InterVarsity Press for partnering with us and sponsoring this series, providing the bookstore, which we encourage you to check out again, and giving us a discount and offering the giveaways. So I hope you've done what you can do to be entered into that. And then I want to thank my friend Ann for joining me tonight for conversation. You can check her out. her writing on her website. You can also check out Comment Magazine, Comment, COMMENT magazine. I actually released an article on their website that was published today about diversity and the common good. So you can look that up and check that out. It's a very rich addition, again, to a credible conversation we had tonight. So thank you so much, Anne. And then we like to close all of our events, including our virtual ones, with our Leadership Links Creed. And so I will recite that for us. I am Leadership Links, part of a community founded on love, inspiration, network, knowledge, and service. I am never alone in this world. God has strategically placed me in the right place at the right time and connected me to the right people to fulfill the purpose He has for my life. Therefore, I will actively take part in the great work God is doing in the world. I promise to always stand, reach out, and link up. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Natasha.
We'll say good night to our guests. Until next time when we can link up, you be well.